Nobody on Flight 612 thought they were about to meet a legend. Not the parents handing tablets to their kids. Not the businessman already drafting emails in his head. Not even the crew, who'd seen turbulence before and thought they knew what rough air meant. Then, at 37,000 feet, the sky stopped acting like a sky. The cabin lights flickered, the floor dropped away, and the aircraft twisted so hard the overhead bins snapped open like cheap plastic. Bags slammed into the aisle, drinks flew, people screamed, and somewhere deep in the airframe, something cracked with a sound you don't forget. In the cockpit, the captain lurched forward and hit the controls like a rag doll. Blood ran down his face, pooled on his shirt, and soaked into the seat straps as the plane kept rolling, kept falling. The warning tones stacked on top of each other, one after another, like the aircraft was trying to say, "You're out of time." And in the right seat sat the first officer. Young, quiet, the kind of pilot passengers assume is there to learn. Her hands were steady, her eyes locked on the instruments, but she didn't move like a trainee anymore. Because this wasn't training, and everybody on board could feel it. The captain tried to speak, but it came out wet and broken. He coughed, and the cockpit filled with that metallic smell that makes your stomach turn. For a second his eyes cleared, sharp and focused, like he finally saw her for who she was. He leaned toward her with the last bit of strength he had left, and whispered 2 words. Night Wraith. Not a name, not a nickname, a call sign. The kind you don't say unless you've lived through things you can't put in a report. The kind that means, I know what you really are. And the way he said it wasn't fear, it was a command. The aircraft slammed again, dropping like an elevator with a cut cable. The captain's hand slipped off the controls, his head sagged, and his voice faded to a breath. Save them, he tried to say, like he was handing her the entire plane with that one sentence. And right then, the young woman everyone underestimated stopped pretending to be ordinary. Before the story starts, comment where you're watching from. And if you want more true aviation stories told like a movie, hit subscribe and stay with me. 8 hours earlier, nothing about her morning hinted at disaster. No alarms, no sirens, no heroic music, just darkness, cold air, and the smell of burnt coffee in the parking lot. The regional airline terminal was barely awake when she walked in at 6:30. Only a handful of cars sat under flickering lights, the kind of place where careers quietly begin and quietly end. She carried a flight bag over one shoulder and a dented travel mug in her hand, dressed like every other junior first officer trying to blend in and keep their head down. A maintenance tech rolled past with a toolbox and nodded. Early one today, he said, half awake. Always, she replied. He glanced at the weather radar glowing on a nearby monitor and winced. Mountains were lit up in angry colors, reds and yellows stacked on top of each other like a warning nobody wanted to read. Storms are nasty out west, he added. You headed toward the high country. She smiled politely, the kind of smile that ends conversations. Yeah, we'll be fine. She'd been saying that for 11 months. Fine meant predictable routes, early mornings, hotel rooms that all smelled the same. Fine meant nobody asking questions, nobody digging into her past, nobody expecting anything special. Fine meant normal, and normal was exactly what she came here for. Inside the crew briefing room, the captain was already seated, older, calm, and deeply experienced. The kind of pilot airlines loved, silver hair, steady voice, 30 years of uneventful landings. He didn't look up at first, just tapped the screen where the storm system sprawled across the map. This is going to be bumpy, he said, like he was talking about traffic on the drive home. I'll fly through the rough air. You keep an eye on the instruments and weather radar. She nodded, set her bag down, and took her seat. She'd heard that speech dozens of times, from captains who saw her as young, capable enough, but not someone you handed the hard parts to. And that was fine too, because the last thing she wanted was attention. She didn't want anyone to know that before this uniform, before these routine flights and quiet mornings, she had lived a very different life. A life measured in classified briefings, burned-out engines, and decisions that came with consequences. That life stayed buried, right where she put it. At least, that was the plan. In that briefing room, she kept her face neutral, but her mind was doing math at a different speed. Because the captain was pointing at the screen like it was just another annoying weather day. But she could see the shape of the system, The way the cells were stacking and curling over the mountains. It didn't look normal. It looked hungry. Captain Grant Holloway, mid-50s, calm as a metronome, tapped the worst part of the map. Front's building fast over the ridgeline, he said. Could be moderate. Could be severe. We'll ride it out. He slid a paper across the table. You monitor radar and instruments. Keep me updated. I'll handle the flying when it gets rough. She nodded like every other first officer would. Yes, Captain. No argument, no ego, no actually. Because she had learned something a long time ago. If you want to disappear, you don't correct people, you let them underestimate you. And to everyone in that room, she looked easy to underestimate. A young pilot with a clean uniform, a polite voice, and a resume that read like a normal career path. Flight school, instructor hours, regional airline, build time, move up. Safe, boring, explainable. What nobody saw was what she had carefully removed from the story. The years before the civilian logbook. The years where the cockpit wasn't filled with coffee and checklists, but oxygen masks and coded radio calls. Where the sky wasn't just weather, it was threat. Where one mistake didn't mean paperwork, it meant someone didn't come home. Before she ever sat in the right seat of a passenger jet, she had flown cutting-edge military fighters. The kind that don't show up in casual conversation. The kind that launch at night and return before anyone admits they existed. She had flown missions that were never meant to be public. Logged thousands of hours in airspace you don't enter unless you're told to. And she had earned a call sign that stuck like a shadow, Night Wraith. In certain circles, that name meant something very specific. It meant the pilot who stayed calm when everyone else panicked. The one who could fly anything through anything. The one who brought damaged aircraft back when physics said no. But she didn't want to be that person anymore. 18 months ago, she walked away. Not because she couldn't do it. Because she was tired of living like every flight might be her last. Tired of adrenaline, tired of secrecy, tired of carrying things she couldn't explain to anyone. She wanted normal. A plain uniform, a predictable route, and a life where nobody used a call sign when they said her name. So she buried Night Wraith. Applied with the parts of her history she was allowed to show. Took a junior first officer job at a small airline. And built a new identity out of quiet mornings and ordinary flights. She looked at the weather one more time, then looked away. Because the whole point of this life was not to be the most interesting person in the cockpit. The whole point was to just be another pilot, doing another flight, on another Tuesday morning. By 7:30, the gate area had that familiar airport energy. Half-asleep families, rolling suitcases, the constant beep of scanners. And a line of people who all believed the safest part of their day would be the metal tube they were about to sit inside. She stood at the cockpit doorway with the standard airline smile. Professional, polite, forgettable. That was the goal. Let passengers see normal. Let the captain be the reassuring face. Let nobody look too closely. Most people walked past without a second glance. But a few paused the way people pause when something doesn't match the picture in their head. A young first officer, calm eyes, steady posture. Not what they expected. Not what they wanted. A man in an expensive suit slowed down just enough to make sure she heard him. He leaned toward his colleague and smirked. They've got kids flying planes now. Then the classic follow-up, louder than necessary. Bet it's one of those fast-track programs. His friend laughed like it was the funniest thing he'd say all week. She didn't react. Not because it didn't sting, but because she'd heard worse in places where the stakes were real. And because the quickest way to feed that kind of arrogance is to show you care. An older woman stopped next, gripping her carry-on like it was a life preserver. She peered into the cockpit and then back at her, eyes full of worry. Dear, how long have you been flying? The question wasn't really about hours, it was about trust. The woman's husband tugged her arm and muttered, "The captain's the real pilot." Like that settled it. Inside, Captain Holloway glanced up with a quiet sympathy. He didn't correct the passengers. He didn't make a speech about professionalism. He just gave her that look seasoned captains give when they've seen the world and know it isn't fair. Comes with being young, he said under his breath. And being you, he added, without needing to spell out what he meant. She slid into the right seat and started the pre-flight checks. Switches, dials, system confirmations, callouts. Everything by the book, everything precise. Her hands moved with a smoothness that looked like talent to some people. But to her, it was just repetition, muscle memory built from years of cockpits that didn't forgive mistakes. Pushback happened on time. The tug pulled them away from the gate. The engines hummed up. She handled radios. The captain handled taxiing. Routine division of labor, routine roles. And if anyone had been watching closely, they would have seen what she worked so hard to hide. Not fear, not uncertainty. Just calm, focused readiness. They took off into a heavy gray morning, climbed through cloud, and popped into clear air above it. The sun hit the wings like a spotlight. The cabin settled, the seatbelt sign clicked off. And for the next hour and a half, everything went exactly the way it was supposed to. At cruise altitude, the captain skimmed the weather display and said it casually, like it was no big deal. We'll start feeling the bumps in about 15 minutes. She keyed the intercom, voice steady and neutral. Cabin crew, please prepare for expected turbulence. In the aisle, the lead flight attendant started securing carts. Passengers adjusted headphones, sipped drinks, went back to ignoring the sky. Because most people think turbulence is just an inconvenience, like potholes in the air. And maybe that's what it would have been, if the weather ahead had been normal, if the radar had been honest, if the mountains weren't hiding something that didn't care how routine the flight schedule was. The first hit came like the plane had punched a wall. Not a gentle wobble, not a little chop. A hard bang that snapped heads up and stole the air out of the cabin. In the cockpit, Captain Holloway's hand went straight to the controls. Calm voice, trained reflex. All right, here we go, he said, like he'd seen it 1,000 times. He made small adjustments, hunting for smoother air the way experienced captains do. Keep your eyes on that radar, he told her. Tell me if those cells build. She was already staring at it, and what she saw didn't sit right. The colors weren't the problem. Storms are always red and yellow. It was the movement, the way the shapes tightened and rotated. The way the wind shear indicators flickered like a warning that didn't want to stay quiet. Captain, she started, keeping her voice professional, controlled. I'm seeing patterns that don't look like standard mountain turbulence. I recommend we request an altitude change. She didn't finish the sentence. Because the second hit wasn't a bump, it was a drop. The aircraft fell so fast it felt like the floor vanished. Stomachs lifted, loose items floated, and the cabin behind them turned into a chorus of screams. Holloway keyed the radio immediately. Center, this is Flight 612, requesting immediate altitude change, severe turbulence. The reply came back steady, indifferent, the way air traffic control has to sound even when your world is shaking apart. Flight 612, standby, traffic in your vicinity, maintain current altitude. And that's when it stopped being turbulence and became something else. The aircraft snapped left, rolled harder than it should. The cockpit tilted, and the sound of the airframe changed. A deep, ugly groan, like metal being bent the wrong way. In the cabin, overhead bins burst open. Bags and jackets and laptops rained into the aisle. A drink cart slammed sideways, and people shouted names like that would anchor them to reality. Holloway gripped the controls, knuckles white. Power up, he barked. Help me level it. She put her hands in, careful at first, still trying to be the junior first officer everyone expected. But the control yoke fought back like it was alive, heavy, delayed, wrong. This wasn't just rough air, something in the aircraft was starting to give. Another slam hit them, and the aircraft rolled the other way. She heard it then, clear as a gunshot. A crack somewhere in the fuselage, sharp, final, the kind of sound that makes your skin go cold. Holloway's voice tightened. Center, Flight 612 declaring emergency, requesting immediate descent, possible structural damage. This time ATC didn't hesitate. Flight 612, cleared immediate descent, maintain flight level 30, turn right heading 270. The turn barely started, because the next wave grabbed them and twisted the plane like a toy. The instruments shivered, warnings flashed, and the controls turned sluggish, like they were moving through wet cement. She scanned the panel fast, eyes tracking what mattered. Hydraulics, she called out. We've lost pressure on one system, the other is unstable. Holloway's breathing turned loud, strained. Get the nose down, he said, forcing the aircraft into a descent that felt more like wrestling than flying. For a moment it seemed like they were winning. Then at around 32,000 feet, the plane pitched up violently. Hard enough to shove them back into their seats, hard enough to steal breath. Then it tipped over into a fall, a real fall. The altimeter unwound too fast, like someone spun the numbers with their fingers. Holloway shouted over the roar. Pull up, pull up. They hauled back together, but the response lagged. A horrible delay between input and movement, as if the aircraft was thinking about whether it wanted to listen. Then the cockpit lurched again. And this time the captain didn't just grunt, he cried out. His body slammed forward into the control column, head snapping down. When she looked left, blood was streaming from a deep cut across his forehead. Captain, she shouted, grabbing his shoulder. He was still strapped in, still in the seat, but his focus was slipping. His hands stayed on the controls out of habit, not strength. His eyes fluttered, confused, glassy. He tried to speak, but he coughed, and the cough brought blood to his lips. Not just a head wound. Something inside him was damaged. And the timing could not have been worse. Because the aircraft was still falling through a sky that had turned predatory. Systems were failing one by one. Passengers were screaming behind them. And the only pilot in the left seat, the one everyone trusted, was fading fast. She could feel the moment shifting. Not just the aircraft, but the entire balance of who was in control. Captain Holloway was still alive, but he wasn't really flying anymore. He was strapped into the seat like an exhausted boxer leaning on the ropes, hands on the yoke out of muscle memory, not strength. Blood kept sliding down his temple and soaking into his collar. Every breath sounded like it had to fight its way out. Captain, look at me, she said, loud enough to cut through the alarms. His eyelids lifted, then sank again, like his body couldn't decide whether to stay in the world. Outside the windshield, the sky was a violent blur. Inside, the instruments were flickering between manageable and we're about to lose everything. She kept her hands light on the controls, still pretending there was time to do this the normal way. Still pretending she was just a regional first officer following procedure. But the aircraft didn't care about her plan. Another jolt slammed them, the kind that makes your teeth click. The nose dipped, then snapped back, and her instincts screamed at her to stop acting small. Holloway's head rolled toward her, and for one strange second, his eyes sharpened. Not the glazed stare of someone fading, but the clear focus of someone making a decision. He stared at her like he was finally reading the fine print on a document he signed months ago. Then his lips moved, barely. Night Wraith, he whispered. The sound hit her harder than any turbulence. Because nobody on this aircraft was supposed to know that name. Nobody in this airline, in this terminal, in this life she built. That name belonged to a locked drawer she never opened. A past she had buried so deep, she almost convinced herself it was gone. Captain, what did you say? She snapped, more startled than she meant to be. He coughed, and the cough brought more blood. But he fought through it, like he needed to get the words out before his body shut him down. I know, he rasped. I know who you are. She froze, hands still on the controls. The aircraft shuddered again, and the altimeter kept bleeding downward. But for a second her mind wasn't in the sky. It was in a locked room inside her chest. Holloway swallowed hard, voice thin but certain. 5 years ago, I flew support runs for a unit out of the desert. I wasn't the hero. I was the guy hauling people in gear, bringing crews in and out. And every time your name came up, the room changed. Not your real name, he added, eyes burning with effort. That other name. He tried to breathe, winced, then forced out the next part. Your commander talked about you like you weren't a person, you were a solution. The pilot who could fly anything through anything. The one who brought everyone home. Her throat tightened, but she didn't let it show. She kept her voice flat, because panic had never helped anyone in a cockpit. Captain, you need to stay awake, she said, though she knew it was slipping away from him. He shook his head slightly, like he didn't have time for denial. His eyes locked onto hers with the weight of a man passing off a burden. Stop hiding, he whispered. Then, louder, like he was commanding a squadron instead of dying in a cockpit. Save them. The aircraft rocked again, and something in the airframe groaned. His hand twitched on the yoke, then slid. His head dropped forward against the straps. And the clarity vanished from his eyes like someone switched off a light. The left seat was no longer a seat. It was a body. An unconscious captain bleeding and fading. And a plane full of strangers behind them who had no idea their survival just changed hands. For one heartbeat, she hesitated. Because taking full control wasn't just a flying decision. It was an identity decision. And then the aircraft dipped again, hard. And reality made the choice for her. The second she saw his head drop forward, the pretending ended. Not because she wanted to reveal anything. Because the airplane didn't care what she wanted, and neither did gravity. She slid her left hand under his arm, locked the yoke steady with her right, and shoved him back into the seat so he wouldn't slump onto the controls. Then she took the aircraft the way you take control of a crisis, fully, instantly, no debate. Her voice changed, not louder, just sharper, cleaner. The voice of someone who has given orders in the sky before and expects people to listen the first time. She scanned the panel once, not like a trainee reading a checklist, like a mechanic reading damage, like a fighter pilot reading a battlefield. Hydraulic pressure unstable, control response delayed, trim fighting back, autopilot useless. This aircraft was wounded, but it was still flyable if she flew it the right way. Her fingers moved fast across switches and selectors, shutting down what was lying, isolating what was failing, rerouting what could still help. She didn't try things, she chose. One system at a time, she rebuilt control authority with whatever tools were left. Then she grabbed the intercom, calm voice, no panic in it at all. "Cabin crew, this is the first officer," she said. "The captain is incapacitated. I have control of the aircraft. I need every passenger seated and belted immediately. Secure the cabin now, carts locked, loose items down. We are going to make aggressive maneuvers to exit this turbulence, and you will feel it. Do not stand up, do not open bins. Follow crew instructions exactly." In the cabin, the lead flight attendant froze for half a second, because that wasn't the polite young pilot from boarding. That was command. And in a crisis, crews recognize command the way sailors recognize a storm. She turned and barked at the team. "Seats now, belts now, move." And they moved, not because they weren't scared, because fear is easier when somebody competent is steering it. Up front, the aircraft lurched again and tried to roll. Most pilots fight that kind of turbulence, pull back, stiff arms, force the plane to obey. She didn't. She let the motion happen, felt it, watched the timing, read the air like it was a living thing. Then she started using it. A hard bank left, not random, timed to the gust, so it carried the turn instead of tearing against it. A quick correction, a tiny roll back, then another bank. Micro moves stacked on top of each other, small, fast, constant. Like she was balancing a coin on a moving table. The nose wanted to rise, she pushed it down. Not into a reckless dive, into a controlled descent. She traded altitude for stability, because altitude is optional and control is not. The cabin screamed as the aircraft dropped. Ears popped, stomachs lifted, prayers started. But the descent had a purpose. She wasn't running away. She was escaping a rotating column of high-altitude wind that was twisting the plane apart. The yoke still felt heavy, sluggish. So she added another tool. Thrust. She adjusted power like a steering wheel, left engine, right engine, tiny differences to keep the aircraft level when the hydraulics couldn't. It wasn't pretty, but it was effective. Another slam hit them, and she rode it instead of fighting it. She rolled with the gust, then snapped back inside the limits. Close enough to the edge that you could feel it in your bones. But never past it, because she knew exactly what the airframe could take, and exactly where the line was. Seconds stretched, then minutes. The worst part of the turbulence kept trying to drag them back up into the chaos. She kept driving them down and out, one controlled move after another, until the shaking started to change. From violent ripping motion to rough bumps. Then from rough bumps to something almost normal. And when the aircraft finally broke free below the worst layer, the cockpit went strangely quiet. Not silent. The engine still roared, alarms still chirped. But the violent, tearing feeling eased, like a predator finally lost its grip. She held the plane steady, breathing through her nose, eyes locked forward. Captain Holloway lay unconscious beside her, still bleeding. 100+ people behind her were strapped into seats, shaking, alive. And she didn't celebrate. She didn't even exhale fully yet. Because escaping the storm was only step one. Now she had to get them on the ground, safely, fast, and with a plane that was no longer playing by the rules. For the first time in what felt like an hour, the aircraft stopped trying to rip itself in half. It was still damaged, still shaking, still wrong. But it was flying, and flying was all she needed to start the next fight. She keyed the radio with the same calm she'd used on storms that didn't show up on any weather map. Center, This is Flight 612 Heavy, declaring an emergency. We have structural damage, multiple system issues, and the captain is incapacitated. Request immediate vectors to the nearest suitable runway with emergency services standing by. There was a short pause, the kind that makes your brain invent worst-case scenarios. Then the controller's voice returned, suddenly more focused, more human. Flight 612 Heavy. Roger. Nearest suitable airport is Redstone Municipal, 70 miles southeast of your position. Turn right heading 145. Descend and maintain 15,000. Emergency equipment is being notified now. She didn't hesitate. Right heading 145. Descending 15,000. Flight 612 Heavy. She rolled the aircraft into the turn, gently at first, testing what authority she had left. The controls answered like a tired animal, slow but present. Good. Not perfect, not safe to relax, but good enough to land if she flew it like it wanted to kill her. Down in the cabin, people were crying quietly now instead of screaming. That's what happens when terror turns into shock. The crew moved through the aisle checking belts with white knuckles and forced voices. And every few seconds the plane would shudder and remind them this wasn't over. Up front, she began building a landing plan in her head faster than any checklist could keep up. Hydraulics, compromised mint flaps were a question mark. Normal automation was off the table. And if she tried to fly it pretty would get them all buried. So she flew it honest. Trim became her best friend. She worked the manual controls with constant small adjustments, never letting the nose wander. And when the aircraft wanted to yaw, wanted to roll, wanted to drift, she used thrust like a lever. Left engine a touch, right engine a touch. Balancing the damaged jet the way you balance a table with one short leg. As the runway came into view through broken layers of cloud, Redstone Municipal looked almost too small to be real. A strip of concrete surrounded by flashing lights. And beyond it, a line of emergency vehicles waiting like a bright red fence. Fire trucks, ambulances, airport operations, all staged and ready. She heard the controller again. Flight 612 Heavy. Winds 280 at 18. Runway 27 is active. You are cleared to land. Report on the ground. Cleared to land runway 27. Flight 612 Heavy, she answered. And then she stopped listening to the radio. Because the last mile of an approach like this is where pilots earn their pay. The aircraft was heavy. It didn't want to slow down, and it didn't want to settle. She held the glide path by feel. Tiny corrections, no wasted motion. She kept the nose stable, kept the wings level, kept the descent rate under control. Not fighting the aircraft, negotiating with it. Inside the cockpit, the captain's head shifted slightly with the motion, still unconscious, still bleeding. She glanced once to confirm he was still breathing, then locked back onto the runway. There was no room for emotion yet. The runway lights rushed toward them. The ground came up fast, too fast if you weren't ready. She eased the nose, let the main wheels meet the concrete with a firm, clean contact. Not a bounce, not a slam, just a solid touchdown that told the aircraft, "We're done with the sky now." A split second later, she brought the nose wheel down smoothly. Brakes came in carefully, because damaged systems can punish impatience. Reverse thrust, controlled, measured. The aircraft slowed, rolled, and finally came to a stop on a taxiway where the emergency crews swarmed in, lights flashing across the cockpit windows like a strobe. She keyed the radio again, voice steady but quieter now, like the fight had moved inside her chest. Center, Flight 612 Heavy is on the ground and stopped. We need medical assistance immediately for the captain, and we may have injured passengers. Flight 612 Heavy. Roger. Medical is approaching your aircraft now, the controller replied. She shut the engines down, and for the first time since the sky tried to kill them, she let herself take a full breath. Her hands were still on the controls, but they were shaking now, not from fear, from the delayed arrival of adrenaline. Outside, paramedics sprinted toward the cockpit door. Inside, the cabin behind her was alive, still full of people, still full of sound. And that meant she had won the part that mattered most. The moment the engines shut down, the cabin didn't explode into cheers right away. It did something stranger. It went quiet, the kind of quiet you only hear after people survive something their brains still can't explain. Then the sound started coming back in layers. Sobs, shaky laughter, prayers spoken out loud without embarrassment. The click of seatbelts unfastening and then refastening as the crew shouted, "Stay seated." And outside the windows, red and blue lights washed across the fuselage like a warning beacon. Up front, the cockpit door rattled, then swung open. The lead flight attendant stood there frozen for half a second, eyes wide. Not with panic, with disbelief. She looked at the first officer like she was seeing her for the first time. "Who are you?" she demanded, voice cracking. "I've worked storms, medicals, diversions, all of it. But what you just did, that wasn't normal flying. You pulled us out like you'd done it 100 times." The first officer didn't answer immediately. She glanced at the unconscious captain, watched paramedics climb in and start working him fast. Pressure on the wound. Oxygen. 4. Commands fired back and forth like a practice drill. Then she reached into her flight bag and pulled out something she had not touched in almost a year. It was a photograph, creased, worn at the edges like it had been folded and unfolded too many times. A younger version of her in a flight suit, standing in front of a military jet under floodlights. A call sign painted near the nose, bold letters, the kind you earn and then spend the rest of your life trying to forget. Night Wraith. The flight attendant took the photo with both hands like it might burn her. Her eyes darted from the picture to the woman in front of her, then back again. "No way," she whispered. "You're military." "I was," the first officer said, quiet, almost flat. "Not anymore." The paramedics wheeled the captain out, still breathing, still alive. As they moved, the first officer followed them into the cabin. And that's when the passengers really saw her. Because a few hours earlier, she was the kid in the right seat. The one people joked about at boarding. The one they assumed was there for decoration. Now she walked down the aisle while emergency crews surrounded the aircraft, and every single face turned toward her like she was the only solid thing left in the world. The businessman in the suit stood up, hands shaking, color drained from his face. He opened his mouth twice before the words came out. "I'm sorry," he said, loud enough for nearby rows to hear. "I said things before we took off. I didn't know. I thought." He swallowed and stopped because there was no good way to finish that sentence. She gave him a small nod. No anger, no victory. "You didn't know," she said. "That was kind of the point." Someone farther back called out, "Night Wraith. What does that even mean?" Before the first officer could answer, the lead flight attendant stepped forward, voice firm now, like she had chosen a story and was planting her flag in it. "It means you're alive," she said. "It means the person flying this aircraft had skills most pilots never need, and today we needed them. It means she gave up a life most people would brag about, just to be normal, and when it mattered, she still showed up." And then the cabin broke. Applause, shaking and messy, people clapping while crying, people reaching out like they needed to touch proof that this was real. A few passengers said thank you over and over like the words could repay oxygen. The first officer held her composure until she reached the forward door. Then she stopped, swallowed hard, and kept moving, because if she let go for 1 second, she might not get it back. 2 hours later, the airport had placed her in a small office away from cameras and curious staff. A bland room with a window, a desk, and the hum of fluorescent lights. She had been checked by medics, interviewed briefly, and told the captain was in surgery and expected to survive. She sat there alone, staring at the runway like it might explain what just happened. A knock came, controlled, official. A man in a tailored suit stepped in, the kind of posture that says executive before he introduces himself. "First officer," he said. "My name is Victor Lang, Vice President of Flight Operations." He sat down across from her and placed a tablet on the desk like it weighed something. "I've reviewed the cockpit voice recorder excerpts," he said, eyes sharp. "I've spoken with air traffic control, maintenance, and the medical team." He leaned forward. "I need you to explain to me how you flew a damaged passenger aircraft through conditions our engineers are calling catastrophic. I need you to explain how you executed control techniques our training department doesn't teach. And I need you to explain why the captain's last clear words on the recording were, 'Night Wraith.'" She met his gaze, no flinching left in her. "Before I joined this airline, I served in the military," she said. "I flew high-performance jets on missions I'm not allowed to describe in detail. My civilian credentials are legitimate. Everything in my file is true. I left out the parts that were classified. That call sign," she paused, "it followed me anyway. The executive sat back, silent for a long beat. Then he nodded once, like he had just confirmed a theory. After today, it's not a secret anymore, he said. People are going to talk, investigators are going to ask questions, and other airlines will figure out who you are. He held her eyes. So here's what we do. She braced herself for the word resignation, for legal language, for blame. Instead, he said, no punishment, no scandal. I'm offering you an immediate upgrade path. Captain qualification on an accelerated timeline. Flagship routes. And compensation that reflects what you can actually do. He paused, then added, the doctors believe Captain Holloway's prognosis is excellent. And frankly, that's because you got the aircraft on the ground quickly. Her chest tightened, not from fear this time, from something close to grief, close to relief. I didn't want anyone to know, she admitted. I came here to be normal. He gave a small, almost tired smile. People with your skill don't get normal, he said. Not when 100+ lives depend on you in the sky. Today proved that hiding was never going to last. The question is whether you keep running from what you are, or you use it where it saves the most people. She stared past him at the runway lights, thinking about the cabin screams, the crack in the airframe, the captain's blood, the call sign spoken like permission. And for the first time since she left her old life, she realized something uncomfortable and simple. Maybe the problem was never the call sign. Maybe the problem was trying to pretend she didn't earn it. That evening, when the airport finally stopped buzzing and the emergency crews rolled away, she found herself alone again. Not in the sky this time. In a quiet hotel room with a chair by the window and runway lights blinking in the distance like nothing unusual had happened. Her hands still wouldn't stay still. Not because she was afraid. Because her body was finally realizing it had survived something it wasn't supposed to. She should have felt proud. But what she felt first was grief for the life she tried to build. The quiet one. The anonymous one. The one where nobody stared at her like a headline. Her phone buzzed. A message from the lead flight attendant. Captain Holloway made it through surgery. First thing he asked was, did Night Wraith get them home? When they told him yes, he smiled and went back to sleep. She closed her eyes and exhaled through her nose, slow, controlled. That one sentence hit deeper than the applause, deeper than the executive's offer, because it meant the captain was alive. And it meant he hadn't called her out to expose her. He'd called her out to save people. Another call came, unknown number. Normally she would have ignored it. But something in her gut told her not to. First officer, a woman's voice said, professional and calm. This is Dr. Lena Mercer at Redstone Memorial. Captain Holloway is awake and asking for you. He's stable, but he wants to speak with you if you're able. She didn't hesitate. I'm on my way. The taxi ride to the hospital blurred past streetlights and dark storefronts. The city looked peaceful, almost disrespectfully normal. Like the sky hadn't tried to kill 140 people that morning. In the ICU, monitors beeped steadily. The smell of antiseptic replaced the smell of jet fuel. Captain Holloway lay propped up, bandaged, pale, but very much alive. When she stepped in, his eyes opened and a weak smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Well, he rasped, voice rough. First officer. Then he paused, and his eyes sharpened the same way they had in the cockpit. Or should I say, Night Wraith. She pulled a chair close and sat, keeping her posture professional because it was the only way to keep her emotions from spilling out. How are you feeling, Captain? Like I lost a fight with a steel wall, he said, then coughed and winced. But I'm here. He studied her for a moment. I owe you my life, he said simply. And so does everyone on that aircraft. You don't owe me anything, she replied. We did our jobs. He gave a quiet laugh that turned into a cough. No, he said, shaking his head. You did a job most people don't even understand exists. Then his expression softened. I'm sorry I said it out loud, he admitted. I know you were hiding for a reason. But we were dying up there. And I knew you were the only one who could take us out. She swallowed. How did you know? She asked, finally letting the question out. How long? 6 months, he said. I flew a charter run for a military ceremony. Met a retired colonel. He was telling stories about a pilot from his unit. Said her call sign like it was a ghost story the sky itself respected. He stopped, watching her reaction. Then he showed me a photo. Holloway continued. Younger you, flight suit, standing in front of a jet. I recognized your eyes. Same intensity. Same look of someone who doesn't quit. She stared at the floor for a beat, letting that land. So you kept it to yourself, she said. Until you needed it. Exactly, he replied, no shame in it. Because I figured if you were here flying regional routes, you were trying to survive something that wasn't weather. They sat in silence for a moment, monitors ticking off time. Then Holloway reached out, his grip surprisingly firm for someone fresh out of surgery. Listen to me, he said, voice low. I get it. You wanted normal. You wanted to fly without carrying the weight. She blinked, and her eyes stung. I was tired, she admitted. Tired of being the person everyone relied on when things went sideways. Tired of adrenaline. Tired of being that. You can have normal 99% of the time, Holloway said. But that 1%, he paused, choosing each word. That 1% is why you exist in a cockpit. When procedure isn't enough. When the book runs out. When people need someone who can improvise and still keep them alive. That's when the call sign matters. He squeezed her hand gently. You don't have to choose. You can be both. A knock interrupted them. And when the door opened, she felt her stomach tighten. A man stepped in wearing a formal uniform. Older, authoritative, posture straight as a runway. Not someone she expected to see in a civilian hospital at night. He looked at her, recognition immediate. Then he nodded once, like confirming she was real. Lieutenant, he said quietly, using a title she hadn't heard in too long. Or whatever you're calling yourself these days. Her breath caught. Not fear. Just the shock of the past walking into the room without permission. I'm not here to drag you back, he said, before she could speak. I'm here because what you did today is going to make waves. He pulled a chair and sat like he owned the room. Investigators will come. Regulators will ask how you pulled off maneuvers that don't show up in commercial training manuals. The media will dig until they find something. And once they hear that call sign, he tilted his head slightly. They'll never let it go. She looked down, jaw tight. I didn't want this, she said, honest, exhausted. I didn't want a spotlight. Then don't chase it, the commander figure said. But don't let other people write your story either. Tell the truth. Your version. Not the classified details, he added, almost with a smirk. But the broad truth. You served, you left, you tried to live quietly, and when a plane full of people needed you, you didn't freeze. That's not a scandal. That's character. Holloway nodded from the bed, voice weaker now, but certain. He's right. You saved lives. Own that. She sat there between two worlds. A civilian captain in a hospital bed and a military past that refused to stay buried. And she realized the truth she'd been avoiding. She didn't leave because she hated who she was. She left because she was tired of being needed. But today reminded her of something simple and uncomfortable. Being needed isn't always war. Sometimes it's a cabin full of strangers who just want to see their families again. When she finally stood to leave, Holloway's voice stopped her. Hey, he said softly. Thank you. Not for saving the aircraft. For choosing to stay in it. Outside the hospital, the night air was cold and clear, stars scattered across the sky like the universe was pretending it had done nothing wrong. Her phone had more notifications than she could count, missed calls from unknown numbers, messages from people she hadn't spoken to in years. And somewhere in that noise was a new reality forming whether she liked it or not. She didn't smile because she felt like a hero. She smiled because she finally understood. The call sign wasn't a trophy. It was a promise. A promise that when the sky turns cruel and the rules run out, somebody will still bring people home.